The ritual was the only thing that kept the gray at bay. Every day at 2 in the afternoon, I would pack my laptop into its worn satchel, walk the 7 blocks to the daily grind, and claim the small table in the corner by the window. It was the perfect vantage point, offering a view of the passers-by on the street and, more importantly, a clear line of sight to the counter. From 2 until 9, I would work, surrounded by the rich, acidic scent of roasting coffee beans and the low murmur of conversations I was never a part of. My life had become a series of meticulously observed moments, a collection of other people's stories viewed from behind a screen. I was a ghost in my own existence, a passive observer, and for a long time, I thought that was enough. Then there was Julian. He worked the closing shift, arriving around 4 with a gust of whatever weather the city was offering that day and a smile that seemed to defy the grim realities of customer service. He was not conventionally beautiful in the way of magazine covers, but he was magnetic. He moved with a lazy, confident grace, his shoulders broad under a rotation of faded band t-shirts. His dark hair was always a little too long, falling into his eyes when he leaned forward to work the steam wand. He had a way of looking at people, a direct and unnerving focus that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. For months, I had been the recipient of his casual, the usual, Leo, and I had replied with a tight, yes, thanks, my voice always sounding thinner than I wanted it to. I had cataloged every detail about him. The small silver ring he wore on his thumb, the faint scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the low, rumbling timbre of his voice when he laughed at something a coworker said. He was a splash of vibrant, chaotic color in my meticulously ordered, grayscale world. And I was hopelessly, silently, in love with him. It was a pathetic, juvenile sort of affection, the kind I thought I had left behind in high school. It existed entirely in my head, a fantasy built from stolen glances and 2-word exchanges. He was the sun, and I was a forgotten planet in a distant orbit, content just to watch his light. I never expected to be pulled any closer. I never wanted to be. The risk was too great, the potential for humiliation too profound. My quiet, predictable life was a fortress I had built to protect myself, and Julian was a threat to its very foundations. So I watched, and I yearned, and I told myself it was enough. On that particular Thursday, the city was weeping. A steady, miserable rain had been falling since noon, turning the streets into slick, black mirrors that reflected the neon signs of the shops across the way. The cafe was quieter than usual, the foul weather having driven most people home early. By 8:45, it was just me and an elderly woman knitting a violently purple scarf. At 5 minutes to 9, she finally packed up her yarn, leaving me as the last customer. The familiar pre-closing anxiety began to prickle at my skin. I hated being the last one. It felt like an imposition, a demand for attention I did not want. I began my own packing ritual, shutting down my laptop and sliding it carefully into its sleeve. I coiled my charger with obsessive neatness. Julian was behind the counter, wiping down the steel surfaces with methodical, circular motions. The sounds were muted and comforting. The soft squeak of the cloth, the distant hum of the refrigerators, the gentle drumming of the rain against the large front window. I zipped my satchel and stood, pulling on my jacket. This was the moment I always dreaded, the walk from my table to the door, a 30-foot journey that felt like a mile under the imagined scrutiny of the person behind the counter. I kept my eyes down, fixed on a point somewhere beyond the door. Night, I mumbled, my voice getting swallowed by the cavernous space of the empty cafe. Hang on. Julian's voice cut through the quiet. It was closer than I expected. I stopped, my hand hovering over the door handle. I forced myself to look up. He was standing by the front window, his hand on the cord for the large bamboo shade. The overhead lights cast his face in shadow, but I could see the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. It wasn't his usual bright, customer service smile. This one was smaller, quieter, something just for me. My heart gave a painful, stupid lurch. He drew the shade, the bamboo slats clattering softly as they descended, plunging the front of the cafe into a dim, intimate twilight. The only light now came from the illuminated menu board behind the counter and the dim track lighting over the empty tables. He turned back to me, the half-smile still in place. He mouthed the words, his voice a low whisper that barely carried across the remaining distance between us. "Just a second, stay with me." Then he turned and walked to the door, the bell above it giving a cheerful, incongruous jingle as he opened it just enough to slide the key into the lock. He turned the deadbolt with a solid, definitive thud. The sound echoed in the sudden, profound silence. He had locked us in. Together. My mind went completely, utterly blank. Every carefully constructed wall I had built around myself crumbled to dust in the space of a single heartbeat. The gray was gone. All I could see was him. My first coherent thought was that I was going to be sick. My stomach twisted into a tight, anxious knot, and the air suddenly felt too thick to breathe. I stood frozen, my satchel clutched in my hand like a shield. He hadn't said it loudly, but the words reverberated in my skull, a mantra of panic and disbelief. "Stay with me. Stay with me." Julian leaned his back against the now-locked glass door, folding his arms across his chest. He looked impossibly calm, as if asking a near stranger to remain in a locked coffee shop after closing was the most normal thing in the world. The dim lighting was kind to him, softening the sharp angles of his face and deepening the shadows under his cheekbones. He just watched me, that small, unreadable smile still lingering on his lips. He wasn't saying anything, and the silence stretched, growing heavier with each passing second. It was a silence that demanded to be filled, and I had absolutely nothing to put in it. My brain, usually a frantic hive of overanalysis, had short-circuited. It was a loop of pure, unadulterated panic. This is a mistake. He mistook me for someone else. He's a serial killer, and this is how it begins. He's going to ask me to help him move a body. The absurdity of my thoughts did nothing to calm the frantic thumping in my chest. I felt like a startled animal, every muscle tensed and ready to bolt, but the door was locked, and he was standing in front of it. He finally pushed himself off the door and began to move, not towards me, but back towards the counter. His movements were fluid and unhurried. I didn't move. I couldn't. My feet felt like they were nailed to the floorboards. I watched him disappear behind the espresso machine. I heard the clank of the portafilter being knocked out, the rush of water as he rinsed it. He was just cleaning. He was continuing his closing duties as if I weren't even there. The sheer normalcy of it was more disorienting than anything else. I had expected a confrontation, an explanation, a demand. Instead, I got the mundane sounds of a cafe being put to bed for the night. The squeal of the steam wand being purged, the soft thud of a cupboard closing. I slowly, cautiously, let my arm fall to my side, the strap of my satchel digging into my palm. I took a tentative step back towards my table and sank into the chair, my legs suddenly unwilling to support me. From my seat, I had a partial view of him behind the counter. I could see the back of his head, the strong column of his neck, the way his dark t-shirt stretched across his shoulders as he reached up to wipe down a shelf. Each movement was efficient, practiced. He had done this hundreds, maybe thousands of times. I tried to make sense of it. Why would he do this? Why me? We barely knew each other. Our entire relationship was built on a foundation of caffeine and polite nods. I started replaying every interaction we had ever had, searching for a clue, a sign I had missed. There was the time I had spilled my latte all over my sketchbook, and he had come over with a damp cloth and a free refill, his fingers brushing mine as he handed me the cup. I had obsessed over that touch for a week. There was the afternoon he had complimented my drawing, leaning over my shoulder to get a better look. I could still remember the scent of his soap and something else, something warm and uniquely him. I had been unable to draw a straight line for an hour after he walked away. Were those the signs? Had I mistaken simple, friendly customer service for something more? It seemed impossibly arrogant to assume so. I was nothing special. I was just the quiet guy in the corner, the one who nursed a single coffee for 5 hours and never made eye contact. People like Julian, confident, charming, alive, didn't see people like me. We were part of the background, the scenery. He moved from behind the counter, a wet rag in one hand, and began wiping down the tables. He started at the far end of the cafe, working his way methodically towards me. With each table he cleaned, the distance between us shrank. My pulse quickened in time with his approach. The rhythmic squeak of the cloth on laminate was a countdown. He wasn't looking at me, his focus entirely on his task, but I felt his presence like a change in atmospheric pressure. He was humming, a low, tuneless sound deep in his chest. I couldn't make out the song, but the vibration of it seemed to settle in my own bones. The cafe, which had always felt like a public, anonymous space, now felt intensely private. The world outside had disappeared behind the drawn shade. The rain, the traffic, the city itself had ceased to exist. There was only the dim light, the scent of coffee and lemon-scented cleaner, and the slow, deliberate approach of the man who had locked me inside with him. He reached the table next to mine. He braced one hand on the back of a chair and leaned over, wiping the surface with broad, sweeping strokes. The fabric of his jeans strained across his thighs, and I quickly looked away, a hot flush creeping up my neck. My gaze fell on his hands. They were capable hands, with long fingers and clean, short-trimmed nails. There was a smudge of what looked like ink on his right index finger. I wondered what he did when he wasn't here. I wondered if he drew too. I wondered what he was thinking. He finished the table and straightened up. He tossed the rag onto the seat of the chair and finally, looked at me. His eyes, which I knew from a distance were a dark, indeterminate brown, seemed almost black in the low light. His expression was still neutral, that faint smile just a memory at the corners of his mouth. "Long day?" he asked. His voice was quiet, conversational. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. Yeah, a bit." He nodded slowly, his gaze unwavering. "You're always the last one here." It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. "Sorry," I mumbled out of habit. "I lose track of time." "Don't be sorry," he said, and the smile returned, a little wider this time. "I like it." My brain snagged on those 3 words. I like it. What did that mean? He liked that I stayed late? He liked my company? The ambiguity was maddening. He took a step closer, leaning his hip against the edge of my table. The proximity sent a fresh jolt of panic through me. He was close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He gestured vaguely at my closed laptop. "Working on something interesting." This was familiar territory. Small talk. I could do small talk. "Just a logo design for a new dental practice," I said, my voice tight. "It's riveting." A low chuckle rumbled in his chest. I can imagine. Rows of smiling teeth. "You have no idea." He reached out and casually brushed a few stray sugar granules from the tabletop. His fingers, warm and slightly calloused, grazed the back of my hand. The contact was brief, a flickering, feather-light touch, but it sent a shockwave up my arm. It was an electric current that lit up every nerve ending, leaving a trail of tingling warmth in its wake. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned, tucking it into my lap. My reaction was too fast, too obvious. A dead giveaway. I chanced to look at his face, bracing for a smirk, for a look of pity or confusion. But there was nothing. His expression hadn't changed. His eyes were still on me, his gaze steady and intense. It was as if he hadn't even noticed the touch, or my ridiculous, over-the-top reaction to it. But he had. I knew he had. The air between us thickened, charged with a sudden, palpable tension. He knew, and he wasn't pulling away. The silence that followed was different from the one before. It wasn't empty. It was filled with the unspoken thing that had just happened between us. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, wild bird beating its wings against a cage. I kept my eyes fixed on the spot on the table where his hand had been, as if the sugar granules held the answer to some profound question. Julian was the one to finally break it. He pushed himself off the table, creating a space between us that was both a relief and a disappointment. "Right," he said, his voice a little rough. "The real reason I asked you to stay? Here it comes," I thought. The punchline. The part where I find out this is all a joke. "The lock on the back door is jammed again," he said, running a hand through his already messy hair. "It does this whenever it rains hard. And I hate being the only one here when it happens. Makes me feel like I'm the first victim in a slasher movie." He gave me a wry, self-deprecating grin. "Pathetic, I know, but I was hoping you could just, be here, for moral support, while I fight with it." Of all the scenarios my frantic brain had concocted, this was not one of them. A jammed lock, a fear of being alone in the dark. It was so simple, so mundane, so human. The tension in my shoulders eased by a fraction. It was also, I realized, a little absurd. He was taller than me, broader, clearly stronger. The idea of him being scared of a faulty lock was almost comical. But the way he said it, the slight flush on his cheeks, told me he was being genuine. "Oh," I said, the single syllable sounding woefully inadequate. "Okay. Yeah. Sure. Cool." He seemed relieved. "It's this way." He led me behind the counter, through a swinging door I had never been through before. The back room was a cramped, cluttered space, a stark contrast to the curated tidiness of the cafe. Shelves overflowed with paper cups and bags of coffee beans. Boxes were stacked precariously in every corner. The air was thick with the earthy smell of raw coffee and cardboard. It felt like stepping backstage into a secret, unglamorous world. The back door was a heavy, metal affair with a formidable-looking deadbolt. Julian grabbed the knob and twisted. Nothing happened. He rattled it, putting his shoulder into it, but it wouldn't budge. "See," he said, breathing a little heavily from the effort. "It's a monster. Is there a trick to it?" I asked, stepping closer. "Sometimes if you pull the door towards you while you turn the key, it works," he explained, fishing a set of keys from his pocket. "But it's a two-person job. Can you pull on the handle while I turn?" "Yeah, okay." We positioned ourselves in the narrow space in front of the door. I gripped the cold metal handle with both hands. Julian stood directly behind me, his body pressing against my back as he reached around me to insert the key into the lock. The space was so tight that I was effectively trapped between him and the door. My world shrank to the feeling of his chest against my shoulder blades, the warmth of his breath on my neck. I could smell the faint scent of rain on his clothes, mixed with coffee and his own personal scent, something clean and warm that made my head spin. "Ready?" His voice was a low rumble, right next to my ear. I could only nod, unable to trust my own voice. "Okay, on three. 1, 2, 3. Pull." I pulled with all my might, digging my heels in. Behind me, Julian grunted with effort as he twisted the key. The lock groaned in protest, a horrible scraping sound of metal on metal. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a sudden, violent crack, the deadbolt retracted. The momentum sent me stumbling backward, right into Julian's solid frame. He caught me easily, his hands closing around my upper arms to steady me. "Whoa, got you," he murmured. I was flush against him, my back pressed into the hard planes of his chest. His hands were firm on my arms, his thumbs stroking absently over the fabric of my jacket. I should have pulled away. I should have thanked him and stepped aside. But I couldn't move. My entire body was buzzing, hyper-aware of every point of contact between us. His chin was resting just above my head, and I could feel the vibrations in his chest as he breathed. We stood like that for a moment that stretched into an eternity. Neither of us spoke. The only sound was the frantic pounding of my own heart and the steady, quiet rhythm of his breathing. It was the most intimate I had ever been with another person, this accidental, functional embrace in a cluttered storeroom. And it felt right. Terrifyingly, exhilaratingly right. Then, as slowly as he had taken hold, he let go. His hands slid from my arms, and he took a small step back. The loss of contact was immediate and acute, a sudden coldness where there had been warmth. I stumbled forward, away from him, my face burning with a mixture of embarrassment and a longing so sharp it was painful. "Thanks," he said, his voice sounding slightly strained. "I owe you one." "No problem." I managed to choke out, my back still to him. I stared at the now unlocked door as if it were the most fascinating thing I had ever seen. We walked back into the main cafe area in a silence that felt different yet again. It was no longer tense or questioning. It was fragile, like thin glass. We had crossed some invisible line in that back room, and we both knew it. The pretense of barista and customer was gone, replaced by something raw and uncertain. Julian didn't resume his cleaning. Instead, he walked over to the sound system and turned off the generic instrumental music that was always playing. The sudden, absolute silence was startling. He then gestured to the chairs at my table. "Sit down for a minute? Unless you have to go." It wasn't really a question. I sat. He pulled out the other chair and sat opposite me, leaning forward to rest his forearms on the table. The small, square table that had always felt like enough space now seemed tiny, intimate. Our knees were only inches apart. He looked down at his hands, at the ink stain on his finger. "I lied," he said, his voice low. "About the lock. I mean, it gets stuck sometimes. But not tonight. I could have opened it myself." My breath hitched. I just stared at him, my mind scrambling to process this new information. He finally lifted his head and met my gaze. The playful, charming barista was gone. The person looking at me now was someone else entirely. His expression was serious, open, and deeply vulnerable. It was a look that stripped away all my defenses. "I just wanted an excuse to ask you to stay," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I've been wanting to talk to you, really talk to you, for months, Leo. But I'm a coward. A coward." He was calling himself a coward. Julian, who radiated a confidence I could only dream of possessing. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. He thought he was the coward. "I see you," he continued, his voice soft but intense. "Every day you come in here, and you build this little wall around yourself with your laptop and your headphones. You're always watching everyone, but you never let anyone really see you. And I wanted to see you." His words were like a key turning a lock deep inside me, opening a door to a room I had kept sealed for years. A room filled with loneliness and a desperate, aching need to be seen. He saw me. He actually saw me. Not just the quiet customer, not just a face in the crowd, but me. The realization was overwhelming, a tidal wave of emotion that threatened to pull me under. "Why?" The word escaped me, a raw, broken whisper. It was the only thing I could think to ask. "Why me?" Julian's gaze softened. He reached across the table, his movements slow and deliberate, giving me plenty of time to pull away. He didn't take my hand. Instead, he just rested his palm flat on the table, a silent offering. "Because," he said, his eyes holding mine, "from the moment I first saw you, I had this feeling that you and I speak the same language. A quiet one. A quiet one." My throat closed up. He understood. He understood the silence, the observation, the fortress I had built. He didn't see it as a flaw or a weakness. He saw it as a language. My own secret, silent language. And he was telling me he spoke it, too. I looked down at his hand on the table. It was an invitation, a bridge across the chasm of my fear. All I had to do was cross it. My own hand was trembling as I lifted it from my lap. It felt impossibly heavy, a dead weight. My mind was screaming at me, a chorus of all my deepest insecurities. "Don't do it. It's a trick. You'll make a fool of yourself. He'll regret this. You'll regret this." But for the first time, another voice cut through the noise. It was quieter, but clearer. "What if you don't?" I took a breath, and I placed my hand on top of his. His skin was warm, his fingers instantly curling up to gently clasp mine. It wasn't a handshake. It wasn't a casual touch. It was a connection. Solid. Real. A current of warmth spread from our joined hands up my arm, settling directly in the center of my chest, extinguishing the cold anxiety that had lived there for as long as I could remember. We sat there for a long time, our hands clasped on the table between us, the darkened cafe a silent witness. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. He was right. We were speaking the same language. And in the quiet space between one heartbeat and the next, I finally felt understood. The moment felt both infinite and impossibly fragile. My entire world had tilted on its axis, and the only thing keeping me grounded was the steady, warm pressure of his hand holding mine. My thoughts, usually a chaotic storm, had fallen silent. There was only this: the dim light, the scent of coffee, the man sitting across from me whose eyes held a universe of things I was only just beginning to understand. He was watching me with an unnerving intensity, as if he were trying to read the last 10 years of my life in my face. I felt exposed, stripped bare, but for the first time, it didn't feel threatening. It felt seen, truly seen. His thumb began to move, tracing slow, gentle circles on the back of my hand. The simple, repetitive motion was both soothing and electrifying. Each circle was a question, a reassurance, a statement. I find myself staring at our joined hands. His hand was larger than mine, the skin weathered and calloused in a way that spoke of work that wasn't just wiping down counters. The ink stain on his finger seemed like a secret code. My own hand looked pale and foreign against his. The hand of someone who spent his days clicking a mouse and tapping keys. We were from different worlds, and yet, here we were. "What do you do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The question feels monumental, the first brick in a new foundation. "When you're not here." A slow smile spreads across his face, reaching his eyes and making them crinkle at the corners. It's a genuine, unguarded smile, and it's breathtaking. I paint, he says. Or I try to. Mostly I just move canvases around my apartment and stare at them menacingly. An artist. Of course. It made perfect sense. The way he observed the world, the way he moved, the quiet intensity in his gaze. He saw things differently. He saw color in a world I had painted gray. What kind of things do you paint? Big, messy, abstract things, he says, his smile widening. Lots of color. I'm not very good at staying in the lines. The statement hangs in the air between us, laden with double meaning. I'm not very good at staying in the lines. He was taking a risk right now. He was coloring outside the very clearly defined lines of our barista-customer relationship. He was taking a risk on me. I don't think I have any lines left, I admit, the confession slipping out before I can stop it. His expression softens. His grip on my hand tightens, just for a second. Good, he says, his voice a low, intimate murmur that makes the hairs on my arms stand up. Lines are boring. He starts to lean forward, his gaze dropping from my eyes to my lips. My breath catches in my throat. This is it. This is the moment where the world either shatters or reforms into something new and beautiful. My heart is a frantic drum against my ribs. I feel a primal urge to bolt, to pull my hand back and run out into the rain and never come back. The fear is a cold, familiar poison in my veins. But Julian doesn't rush. He moves slowly, telegraphing his every intention, giving me every opportunity to stop him. His eyes lift back to mine, asking a silent question. Is this okay? I don't know how to answer with words. I don't trust my voice. So I just give the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. It's enough. He closes the remaining distance between us. The world narrows to the space of a few inches. I can see the faint stubble on his jaw, the tiny flecks of gold in his dark brown eyes. He smells of soap and rain and coffee and something else, something warm and alive that is purely him. His lips meet mine. It is not a Hollywood kiss. There is no swell of music, no sudden downpour of conveniently romantic rain. It is quiet. It is gentle. It is hesitant at first, a soft, tentative question. His lips are warm and surprisingly soft. For a moment, we just stay like that, a simple, chaste press of mouths. Then, he deepens the kiss, a slow, deliberate claiming. And I respond. All the years of pent-up loneliness, of silent yearning, of watching from the sidelines. It all melts away in a wave of overwhelming relief. I am no longer an observer. I am a participant. My hand, the one not held captive in his, comes up to rest on his jaw, my fingers sinking into the soft scruff there. He makes a low sound in the back of his throat, a sound of pleasure and surrender, and his other hand comes up to cup the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair. It is a kiss that is not about passion in the fiery, explosive sense. It is about recognition. It is the feeling of coming home to a place you never knew you were searching for. It is every unspoken conversation we have had over the past 6 months, every stolen glance, every quiet moment of observation, finally given a voice. It tastes of coffee and longing and the promise of a new beginning. When we finally break apart, we are both breathless. He doesn't pull back far. He rests his forehead against mine, our noses almost touching. His eyes are closed. I keep mine open, memorizing the shape of his face in the dim light, the flutter of his eyelashes against his cheek. Leo, he breathes, my name a prayer on his lips. I can't speak. I can only lift a hand and trace the line of the small scar in his eyebrow, a detail I had only ever seen from a distance. His skin is warm beneath my fingertips. He opens his eyes. They are dark and deep, and what I see in them finally silences the last of my fears. I see my own reflection. I see a mirror of the same awe, the same terror, the same breathtaking hope that is flooding my own heart. He laces his fingers with mine on the tabletop, our hands fitting together as if they were made for it. I was so scared you were going to say no, he confesses, his voice rough with emotion. I was so scared you were going to ask, I reply, and a watery laugh escapes me. He smiles, a real, wide, brilliant smile that lights up his whole face. Well, he says, squeezing my hand. Look at us. A couple of cowards. In that moment, in the quiet, darkened coffee shop, surrounded by the ghosts of 100 lonely afternoons, I don't feel like a coward. I feel brave. I feel seen. I feel, for the first time in a very long time, completely and utterly alive. The immediate aftermath of the kiss was a strange, suspended moment. We remained leaning across the table, our foreheads touching, our hands intertwined. The world had irrevocably shifted, but the cafe was exactly as it had been. The refrigerators hummed. The rain pattered against the window. It felt like we were in a snow globe, a perfect, fragile scene sealed off from the rest of the world. But I knew, with a prickle of my old anxiety, that someone would have to shake the globe eventually. I became acutely aware of everything. The slight tremor in his hand holding mine. The way his chest rose and fell with each breath. The faint, lingering taste of coffee and him on my lips. My mind, which had been blissfully silent, began to stir. What now? The question echoed in the quiet space. What happens after the kiss you've only ever dreamed of turns out to be real? Julian must have felt the shift in me, the subtle return of my tension. He pulled back slowly, just enough to look me in the eye. The brilliant smile had softened into something more contemplative, more gentle. But his eyes were searching mine, and I could see a flicker of uncertainty there. My own anxiety flared in response. He regrets it. It was a mistake. A moment of madness. The silence stretched. It was only a few seconds, but it felt like an hour. I felt the urge to apologize, to take it back, to say something that would reset the world to the way it was 5 minutes ago, safe and predictable and lonely. My mouth opened, but no words came out. "Hey," he said, his voice soft but firm, cutting through my rising panic. "Look at me." I forced my gaze to meet his. "Don't go back in your head," he said, and his perception was so accurate, it was like a physical blow. "Stay here." With me, he squeezed my hand again, a small, grounding pressure. That was good, right? It was a simple question, but it held the weight of everything. He was giving me an out, but he was also asking for reassurance. My answer mattered. I saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the same fear of rejection that had been my constant companion for years. In that moment, I realized he was just as scared as I was. The thought was strangely comforting. "Yeah," I breathed, the word full of a relief so profound it made me feel lightheaded. It was good. The tension in his shoulders visibly eased. A small, relieved smile touched his lips. "Okay," he said, as if confirming a vital piece of data. "Okay, good." The test wasn't over, though. It had just changed form. The next step was a precipice, and I didn't know if I was ready to step off it. What did we do? Did I go home, and we pretend this never happened next time I came in for coffee? Did we sit here all night? The logistics of hope were something I had never had to consider. Julian seemed to be having a similar thought process. He glanced around the empty cafe, at the chairs stacked on the other tables, at the drawn shade on the front window. So, he began, then stopped. He licked his lips, a nervous gesture that I found absurdly endearing. "My shift is over. Officially. Right?" I said, my mind a blank. "We should probably get out of here," he continued, still holding my hand. "Before the morning crew finds us and things get weird." He was right. But the thought of leaving, of stepping back out into the real world, was terrifying. Here, in this bubble, it was easy. Out there was rain and traffic and other people and the crushing weight of reality. The walk to the door, which had felt so daunting an hour ago, now felt like a walk to the gallows. He must have seen the fear in my eyes. His expression softened with understanding. "Hey," he said gently. "It's okay." He stood up, pulling me with him, our hands still linked. The sudden shift from sitting to standing made me dizzy. He didn't let go. He just stood in front of me, a solid, warm presence in the dim light. "Let's go somewhere that isn't here," he said. It was a suggestion, but it felt like a lifeline. He was making the choice. He was taking the lead, saving me from the paralysis of my own indecision. All I had to do was agree. All I had to do was take that one, terrifying step forward. I looked at our joined hands, then back up at his face. He was waiting, his expression patient, hopeful. I nodded. "Okay." The relief that washed over his face was palpable. He let go of my hand, and for a heart-stopping second, I thought he was pulling away. But he was just shrugging off his apron, bundling it up and tossing it onto the counter. He grabbed his own jacket from a hook in the back room and my satchel from the chair where I dropped it. He handed the satchel to me, his fingers brushing mine again. This time, I didn't flinch. He walked to the front door and unlocked it. The sound of the deadbolt retracting was just as loud as before, but this time it sounded like a release. He pushed the door open, and the sounds of the city rushed in. The hiss of tires on wet pavement, the distant wail of a siren, the smell of rain-soaked concrete. The bubble had popped. He held the door open for me and waited. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the daily grind, not as a customer leaving at closing time, but as someone else entirely. I stepped out into the cold, wet night and into the beginning of a new story. The rain had softened to a fine mist that hung in the air, blurring the edges of the streetlights and casting halos of orange and white on the slick pavement. The city felt hushed, washed clean. Julian locked the door behind us, the jingle of the bell a final, cheerful farewell. He turned to me, the collar of his jacket pulled up against the damp. "My place isn't far," he said. "If you want to come over, we could have tea. Or something." He seemed almost shy now, the boldness he'd shown inside the cafe tempered by the open air and the reality of the situation. "No pressure, though. I can walk you home, or to the subway." This was another choice, another crossroad. Go with him into the unknown, or retreat to the safety of my solitary apartment. The old Leo, the one from 2 hours ago, would have made his excuses. He would have thanked him and fled, spending the entire night dissecting the evening until it was nothing but a collection of anxieties and potential missteps. But I wasn't the old Leo. The old Leo hadn't been kissed by a handsome barista in a darkened coffee shop. The old Leo hadn't had his hand held like he was something precious. "Tea sounds good," I said, and the smile he gave me was worth every ounce of fear I had to push through to say the words. We walked in a comfortable silence. The streets were mostly empty, and our footsteps echoed softly in the damp air. We didn't hold hands. The space between us felt charged, a live wire of potential. I was intensely aware of him beside me, the way his shoulder occasionally brushed against mine, the rhythm of his breathing, the way he looked at the city lights with a painter's eye. His apartment was on the 4th floor of a pre-war walk-up, the kind with worn marble steps and a lingering smell of old wood and other people's dinners. The hallway was dimly lit and narrow, and I felt a fresh wave of anxiety as he fumbled with his keys at the door. This was real. I was at his home. He pushed the door open and flicked on a light. "It's not much," he said, a note of apology in his voice. "But it's home." It was one large room, a studio apartment that was more studio than apartment. The space was dominated by canvases. They were everywhere. Huge, vibrant paintings leaned in stacks against every wall. Some were finished, explosions of color and texture. Others were blank, waiting. A massive easel stood near the large, multi-paned window that looked out onto the glittering, wet city. The air smelled of turpentine and oil paint and something else, that warm, clean scent that was just him. A mattress lay on a low wooden frame in one corner, covered in a rumpled duvet. A small, functional kitchen was tucked against the opposite wall. In the center of it all was a worn, comfortable-looking couch and a coffee table cluttered with art, books, and mugs. It was messy, it was chaotic, but it was vibrantly, unapologetically alive. It was him. "Wow," I said, unable to hide the awe in my voice as I looked at the paintings. They were stunning, fierce and emotional, and full of a kind of energy I had never seen before. "Yeah, it's a bit of a disaster zone," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Sorry about the mess." "No, it's amazing," I said, turning to him. "You're really talented, Julian." He looked genuinely taken aback, a faint blush rising on his cheeks. "Thanks," he mumbled, looking away towards the kitchen. Tea. Right. What kind do you like?" "Anything is fine." I watched as he filled a kettle and set it on the stove. His earlier confidence seemed to have evaporated, replaced by a charming, nervous energy. He moved around the small kitchen, opening and closing cupboards, his movements a little jerky, a little unsure. It was strangely endearing. It made him real. I wandered over to the wall of canvases, my fingers itching to touch them. I stopped in front of a huge painting, a swirl of deep blues and violent flashes of orange, like a sunset or a fire. It was beautiful and sad and hopeful all at once. "That one's my favorite." His voice came from behind me, making me jump. He was holding 2 steaming mugs. He handed one to me, our fingers brushing. The warmth of the mug seeped into my cold hands. "I painted it after a rough patch. It's called The Day After." We stood in silence for a moment, looking at the painting together. I could feel the emotion pouring off it, the raw, chaotic energy of rebuilding. It feels hopeful, I said quietly. Yeah, he said, his eyes on the canvas. That's the idea. He finally turned to me, his gaze soft. Come on, let's sit. We sat on the worn couch, a respectable distance between us. The springs groaned in protest. I cradled the warm mug in my hands, the steam warming my face. The silence returned, but it wasn't awkward. It was a comfortable, settled silence. The kind of silence you can only share with someone you feel safe with. I took a sip of tea. It was chamomile, sweet and calming. I looked around the room again, at the glorious, beautiful chaos of his life spread out for me to see. He had let me in, not just into his apartment, but into his world. The vulnerability of that, the trust, was a gift. He was watching me, a small, curious smile on his face. What are you thinking about? He asked. Just all of this, I said, gesturing vaguely at the room. It's a lot to take in. Good a lot? Or get me out of this crazy person's apartment a lot. I laughed, a real, genuine laugh. Good a lot, I assured him. It's just so different from my place. Oh yeah? What's your place like? He asked, leaning forward, his interest piqued. Clean, I said, and the word sounded clinical, sterile. Minimalist. Lots of white and gray. Very orderly. He nodded slowly, taking that in. A fortress, he said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. I looked down into my tea. Yeah, I whispered. A fortress. He was quiet for a moment. Then he set his mug down on the coffee table and shifted on the couch, turning to face me. You know, he said, his voice gentle. Fortresses are good at keeping things out, but they're also really good at keeping you in. I met his gaze. He was so close now. I could see the sincerity in his eyes, the deep well of empathy there. He wasn't judging me. He was trying to understand me. I'm tired of being inside, I confessed, the words tasting like freedom. His smile was slow and devastatingly sweet. He reached out, not for my hand this time, but to gently cup my jaw. His thumb stroked my cheek, a gesture of incredible tenderness. Me too, he said. And he leaned in and kissed me again. This kiss was different from the one in the cafe. It was slower, deeper, filled with the quiet comfort of this room and the promise of the morning to come. It was a kiss that said, you are safe here. We can be cowards together. The story doesn't end there, with a kiss on a worn-out couch. It ends, and begins, much later, as the first hints of dawn begin to bleed through the massive window, turning the dark city skyline from black to a soft, bruised purple. We never made it to the bed. We didn't talk much more, either. The time for words, for confessions and explanations, was over. We had moved into a new language, one spoken through touch and proximity and the simple, profound act of sharing a space without pretense. We had migrated from the couch to the floor, lying on a soft rug amidst the towering canvases, my head pillowed on his chest. His arms were wrapped around me, holding me securely. I could feel the slow, steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath my ear, a solid, living metronome that had grounded me through the long, quiet hours of the night. His hand rested on my back, his fingers occasionally tracing idle patterns on the fabric of my shirt. I hadn't slept. I was too wired, too aware, too terrified that if I closed my eyes, I would wake up in my own cold, empty bed and find that this had all been an elaborate, cruel dream. So I listened. I listened to the sound of his breathing, deep and even in sleep. I listened to the old building groaning around us. I listened to the distant, lonely sound of the first train of the day rattling on its tracks. His apartment was just as alive in the dark. The moonlight streaming through the window turned his paintings into mysterious, shadowy landscapes. The smell of turpentine was sharp and clean. It was the smell of creation, of work, of purpose. I breathed it in, letting it fill my lungs. I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me, a quiet that was not born of emptiness, but of fullness. This was what it felt like, then, to not be alone. It wasn't a grand, cinematic revelation. It was a quiet, creeping warmth. It was the weight of an arm draped over your side. It was the knowledge that if you had a nightmare, there was someone right there to wake you up. It was the simple, staggering intimacy of listening to another person sleep. Julian stirred, his breathing changing. His hand on my back tightened, pulling me closer. He mumbled something in his sleep, a wordless sound of contentment. I held my breath, not wanting to wake him, wanting to preserve this perfect, fragile moment for as long as possible. I thought about my own apartment, my fortress. So clean, so orderly, so gray. I had built it to keep the world out, but Julian was right. It had only served to trap me inside. I had mistaken solitude for safety, silence for peace. I had been living a half-life, a ghost haunting the edges of other people's stories. Julian's story wasn't neat or orderly. It was a glorious, chaotic mess of color and emotion, splashed onto canvases that were too big to be contained. And he had invited me into it. He hadn't asked me to change, to be bolder or louder or more colorful. He had just seen me, sitting in my gray corner, and he had understood. He had walked over, locked the door, and quietly, patiently, shown me that the world could be more than just something to be observed through a window. As the light grew stronger, painting soft gray and pink stripes across the wooden floor, he began to wake up. His breathing hitched, and I felt the muscles in his chest tense as he returned to consciousness. He was still for a long moment, and a familiar spike of fear shot through me. The morning after, the moment of regret. But then he shifted, his hand moving from my back up to my hair, his fingers gently combing through the strands. "You're still here," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "You're still here too," I whispered back to the fabric of his shirt. He chuckled, a low, sleepy rumble that vibrated through me. Wasn't planning on going anywhere. He tilted his head down, trying to look at my face. I kept it hidden against his chest, suddenly shy in the growing light of day. "Hey," he said softly. He used his hand in my hair to gently guide my head up. I finally looked at him. His hair was a wreck. His face was marked with sleep lines from the rug, and he had never looked more beautiful. His eyes were soft, free of any trace of regret or uncertainty. There was only a quiet, sleepy warmth. "Morning," he said, his thumb stroking my temple. "Morning," I replied, my voice hoarse. He smiled, a slow, lazy smile that was just for me. "I was worried I dreamed you." "I was worried you were a dream," I admitted. "Nope," he said, his voice firm. "Real. We're real." He leaned in and gave me a soft, chaste kiss. It was a simple, easy gesture, as natural as breathing. It was a morning kiss, a domestic kiss, a kiss that spoke not of frantic discovery, but of comfortable continuation. He pushed himself up into a sitting position, pulling me with him. The early morning light filled the room now, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The city outside was waking up, a low hum of traffic starting to build. He didn't let go of me, just wrapped an arm around my shoulders and pulled me against his side. We sat there, on the floor of his studio, and watched the sunrise paint the sky in strokes of orange and pink and gold. I rested my head on his shoulder, breathing in his scent, feeling the solid warmth of him next to me. The fear was gone. The anxiety, the constant, chattering chorus of doubt in my head, was silent. It was replaced by a quiet, profound sense of rightness. I looked at the canvases stacked against the wall, at the glorious mess of his life that now surrounded me. And I looked at the sky, at the vibrant, impossible colors of a new day. My world wasn't gray anymore. It had never been gray. I just hadn't been brave enough to open my eyes and see the color that was there all along. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if this was the start of a week, or a year, or a lifetime. The future was still a vast, terrifying unknown. But as I sat there, tucked securely against Julian's side, watching the sun climb higher into the sky, I realized I wasn't afraid of it anymore. For the first time, I felt like I hadn't just been observing a sunrise. I felt like I'd come home.